Hey everyone, so the class review series is over and it's now time for the roundups. Today we're going to be tackling the range specs of World of Warcraft, and like always, balance is completely different by week 3 of BfA because of pre-raid hotfixes, so there's not much point in doing DPS rankings or anything like that. The only thing that's going to persist through the length of the expansion is the strength of each spec's design, so that's what we're going to be measuring today. As per usual, I'm going to do a quick series of thoughts on every single spec, and then a roundup of all of them against each other at the end. So let's kick it off with the Fire Mage. This has really managed to make it into BfA pretty much unscathed, with the only downside being that you'll have to choose between a faster Fire Blast, or Blast Wave even, and Phoenix Flame as a talent. That's a bit unfortunate, but we do have some good points as well. As an example, Pyroclast is now a talent. Overall though, I would say that Fire continues to be an extremely enjoyable spec, with fast reaction times, big bursts of gameplay whenever it's time to pop Combustion, and yeah, it's just fast-paced, it's exciting, and the specifics of its mechanics start to be really fun once you learn how to say Pyrofish. So overall, for me, massive thumbs up for Fire, and it's one of the best realized spec fantasies in World of Warcraft, bar none. Let's move over to Frost. So Frost also fares quite well in BfA, with their proc rates being a little bit increased to make up for the loss of the artifact, but also rebalanced relative to each other, such that you get slightly more flurries now. This makes for a highly mobile spec because of the instant casts with fun ability interactions once you get down into the guts of their mechanics, with the only downside being that sometimes you can get too much good RNG, which leads to the unavoidable suboptimal use of resources, which sometimes isn't super fun. Still though, this spec is largely the same as it was with Legion. It continues to be quick and easy fun with some great high points, for an example getting a flurried glacial spike, which is pretty awesome. So yeah, not as good as Fire, but still I think a very well designed spec that's fun. And then let's finish the mages off with Arcane, once again similar to Legion, but with Arcane missiles no longer playing a part in the Arcane charge gameplay, and that has the effect of allowing you to do decent burst DPS on priority without having to rely on charges, which is a nice little quality of life increase. Past that, the gameplay is very similar though. It's all about the flow between the burn and conserve phases, all lined up with your cooldowns. It's an easy spec with an interestingly punishing metagame that demands planning, so that's a sort of an odd balance of things. That's something that sets it apart from most WoW specs. However, I don't think that it's incredibly fun, to be honest, but I also don't really think it's that bad. Next, Marksmanship Hunter. So the Legion MM Hunter has been gutted. The good part is that it's no longer built on top of an auto attack RNG, so that's good. However, the spec to me is deeply boring. I just don't enjoy it at all. Is it like really annoying? No, it's not frustrating or anything like that. It's just incredibly plain in terms of its abilities and its pacing, and I struggle to find it interesting. It feels like the antithesis to, say, the Fire Mage. The only bright spot is AoE, where the trick shot mechanic comes in, but past that, not really great. Yeah, I would just say it's slow and boring. So let's move on to Beast Mastery. BM has moved into BfA really well. They have baselined its most enjoyable talent, Dire Frenzy, and this, plus some other tweaks, elevates BM from its previously laughed at easy mode spec into something that actually is a fair bit more involved, and it's actually got quite a fast pace because of the sheer quantity of cooldown reduction mechanics that are in the spec. So between maintaining barbed arrow or barbed shot uptime and using your bestial wraths perfectly, I was actually surprised how much there was to this spec, especially because I bounced off it and kind of laughed at it during Legion, so I definitely think it's worth giving it a shot in BfA again. And then we move on to Elemental. So yeah, Elemental's pretty good. It's not thrilling, is it? It's okay. It's a bit slower than it was in Legion, and they've removed Elemental Focus, which was a mechanic that added a good bit more strategy to the spec. There are some welcome talent changes and some cool potential new synergies, but right now, I am left with it being a bit underwhelming. Legion players will have no trouble getting used to it. They'll likely just notice it's a bit slower and it's a bit more simple, and for me, that's not really great. Next, Shadow. Yeah, Shadow's a tragedy. Blizzard have totally refocused the spec away from being all about getting the longest void form possible, and in doing so, they have gutted what made it unique, and they have really left us with a spec that has a cool gameplay idea with void form, but otherwise very boring, simple DPS rotation. It can be quite fun in AoE because of the new Void Eruption plus a few of its other talents, but other than that it does feel like a downgrade. Insanity Generation is weaker, Insanity Drain from Void Form is higher, then Void Torrent, Lingering Madness, and Mindbender are all in the same tier, and they're things that we just would have had, we wouldn't have had to choose between them previously. We've also lost Shadow Ward Death baseline, and it's just sad. Now, some of the new additions like Dark Ascension are cool, but for me, they in no way make up for what has been lost. Next, the Affliction Warlock. So, I think this comes out ahead because of Deathbolt. Now, the worry is that Deathbolt is a talent, so it mightn't always be used, but when taken, it creates a really, really enjoyable spec. It's a dead satisfying ability to use. Past that, though, the core rotation is still there. It's pretty much the same. It's really fun in AoE because you're challenging your management skills, spreading all your dots around. It also has its cooldown demon being a lot more interesting now, or it interacts with your dots more actively than previously. Overall, I'd say that this spec is pretty fun, and it's had a slight upgrade in gameplay over Legion. And then we've got Destruction. Once again, we see some nice tweaks. Baselining Backdraft, that's very good. And like with the other warlocks, our cooldown demon now interacts with our mechanics, in this case our resources. We also have the return of Dark Soul, which brings back the famous interaction that characterized the end of Mists of Pandaria for the Destruction warlocks. I think that it pretty much has just received a flat upgrade in Battle for Azeroth. So if you want a slightly slower pace, more methodical caster, I think it's a pretty great pick. Unleashing a stream of Chaos Bolts after popping Dark Soul is still just as satisfying as I remember it being back in the day. Next, we've got Demonology. This is a wonderful spec. Like with Legion, we're still summoning in hounds and imps, but the imps now spawn around your character, which makes them a lot more noticeable and sort of satisfying. Then the core gameplay loop of demonic empowerment is dead. In its place, we have demonic core. Whenever imps die, they have a chance to give you a stack of this buff, and this buff will make Demon Bolt instant. Now, Demon Bolt does a ton of damage, and it generates 2 soul shards, which of course go right back into more imps through Hand of Gul'dan. This creates a very fast-paced spec, where you're always trying to build the largest flock of demons that you can. Now, you can then use Demonic Tyrant, which extends the duration of all active demons and empowers them. So if you use that, and then you summon in another wave or 2 of imps, you just have a tremendous little flock of imps around you, and it's really cool. And then they soon all die, which gives you loads of demonic core charges, which means loads of instant demon bolts, and then bam, you're right back in the thick of it again. This is a wonderfully designed spec. It's a bit more on the simple side, but I think they've really realized the fantasy of being a master of demonic summoning. And yeah, I guess it's kind of simple, but it's really fun, and it's a game, so I think that's what matters. Then next up, we've got Balance. So Balance, along with the Fury Warrior, received a stack of late-in-the-day changes in beta, pretty much like in the last time window before class changes were locked in for launch. And they were great changes. So we've got a new mechanic called Eclipse. This adds much needed unpredictability into the core of the spec. It means there's more to react to, and it makes the rotation a little bit more involved. They then also added Astral Power Generation to a few key talents that I think are pretty fun. However, we do suffer from, I'd say, a pretty boring main cooldown, largely because Moon also is not baseline anymore. I really wish that it was baseline instead of a talent, because I think that would just be the right amount of complexity for the core of this spec. Now that means that while we have had welcome changes, some of it is a little bit on the dull side still, unless you talent into Starlord, which is, I think, one talent that really saves the spec for me. It gives you a short-term gameplay loop that ties into your resource management that's really satisfying. So by default, it's still on the boring side. It is better than it was, and with one talent, it can be elevated to be a good bit more interesting than otherwise would be. So there you go, that's my thoughts on all of the range specs of World of Warcraft. Let's now break it down into 4 quality buckets, ranging from excellent to very good to okay to sort of below average. So we'll start off with excellent, and overall I think Fire Mage is the best, most complete design. It has a unique gameplay feel with blazingly fast pacing, and it provides gameplay that I think ranges from being simple and enjoyable to being quite satisfying on the high end once you get good at the pyro fishing. So overall, massive thumbs up. Moving on to the very good section, Frost gets in here. It's a bit on the simple side. It's got some really fun synergies, with the exception of the RNG sometimes being too good and causing overgeneration. Overall, though, I would say it's pretty darn fun, especially once you start getting those big flurried glacial spikes. And then next in this tier, we've got Demonology. It slips in here for being so damn unique. It's a great combo of being a horde spec with all of those demons, but also having some really fun abilities of our own with the demonic core mechanic. I mean, come on, Demon Bolt's basically an instant pyro that generates resources, which is really fun. Let's move on to the sort of okay, like pretty good section, and here we've got Affliction and Destro. They both make it in here. They're really solid specs, and Affliction actually, like, it's got a great talent in Deathbolt that really elevates the gameplay, but overall, I think they are middle of the pack. But it's worth saying that it's a pretty damn strong pack, with most of the range specs actually being pretty good. Beast Mastery also makes it in here because of its great baseline changes. You know what? I think it's pretty fun. The pace is fast as hell. There is a lot of room for error if you play it wrong, actually more than there is with most specs. Like, if you hit the wrong buttons with this, you really mess up. And then Arcane, Balance, and Elemental, to me, they are the most plain specs. They kind of, they lack excitement compared to the other specs in the game, even though Balance has seen some good changes. I think that, you know, they're perfectly playable and they are enjoyable. They're just a little bit below the others. And then finally, we've got the below average section, and this is where Shadow and Marksmanship live. Shadow has had its core identity gutted out in BfA as far as I'm concerned, and then Marksmanship is just deeply boring. It's functional, but it's so damn plain. Overall then, 2 duds. Everything else, pretty damn great. They're all things I would be happy to play. They range from being okay to brilliant. Perhaps a few less outstanding designs in with melee, but I actually suspect it's harder to make an enjoyable range spec than it is for melee, so I definitely do respect the work that Blizzard have done here. So there you go, that's my take. If I had to pick one spec and one spec only, it would probably be Fire, but also that's helped out because I know I would enjoy Frost if I had to play it as well. Then I think Warlocks actually are surprisingly solid across the board if you want a nice, pure DPS class. So yeah, there you go. That is my thoughts on the ranged specs of the game after playing all of them through Battle for Azeroth Beta. I'd be dead keen to hear what you think down in the comments, but other than that, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.